Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. So a bit more tense, screamed midwife Lilia in one of the wards of a luxury private clinic. All right, Sarah, take notes. 200. A young Sarah, a girl interning at this clinic, nervously wrote everything the woman said on a card. Victoria helped Lilia cut the umbilical cord and handed the baby to the mother. Nice work, Emma. As you name her, Victoria praised her laboring mother, who she had guided through the pregnancy from the beginning. Michael and I decided to name her after his grandmother, Sophia. Through tears, the girl spoke through her tears. She was happy that during all these months of pregnancy, Victoria had helped her both physically and mentally. Emma never once doubted her decision. Choosing this Montfort clinic was indeed the best of the best in Canada. Although she had to pay a lot of money for it, the whole 9 months went comfortably, just like her labor. She looked at her baby for a long time and finally looked up at Victoria, her midwife, to whom the girl was insanely grateful. "Thank you," she whispered. She received a genuine smile in return. Victoria was one of the best midwife doctors in Toronto. She had attended many conferences, meetings, competitions, and was indeed an experienced doctor. Therefore, she undoubtedly had clients. The girl worked in a private maternity hospital, the Ford Foundation, and she was actually paid good money. However, always when she was asked if she wanted to open her own clinic, she shook her head, arguing that there would be more financial worries than the work itself with the client. And she really loved her business, making sure the mother and newborn were okay. She left the room, leaving them to the care of specialists on behalf of experienced than her, but true professionals. Thanking everyone for their excellent work, she left the labor and delivery room and walked down the hallway towards her office. She was joined by another midwife who was carrying some papers in a brown folder. She was obviously overjoyed about something. Victoria watched her with a puzzled, smiling expression on her face. "And yet I decided to ask what happened. But at last I thought you wouldn't ask." Testament girl with joy, and even jumped up like a child. "I was approved, Vic." To Victoria at first did not realize what her colleague meant. However, remembering their dialogue a week ago, she immediately brightened up. "What's true? You were finally allowed to adopt him." "Yes, there were problems with the paperwork, but John helped me, and now we can't wait to be parents." "Stella, congratulations. It took you this long. Finally, one more happy family. I'm so happy for you and John." I'm bursting with emotion. Stella decided to hug Victoria and thank her for being there for her when she made the decision. Stella had never wanted to give birth, reasoning that it would ruin her body, or the baby could be disabled. And despite the doctor's attempts to convince her that technology has long advanced and none of her fears would come true, she flatly refused to make her own child. And a month ago, the girl still decided to start a family and take a child from the orphanage. Together with her husband, John, she went through various adoption procedures. After all, this case is not simple and also has pitfalls. As long as the paperwork is formalized, as long as the couple passes all the medical examination. However, it took 3 weeks and she was finally approved for adoption. She had long ago found a boy she liked. The girl didn't want to do like most couples who wanted a smart and handsome child. She was only looking for a little man who would love her as much as she loved him. In none of the shelters, Stella found a boy from the age of 7 named Mark. She knew immediately that this boy would be like family to her, so she decided to adopt him by all means. "I can pick Mark up tomorrow. I'm so happy, Vic," the girl said as they walked down the hospital corridor. What she saw, however, was not the same face that had been smiling at her a moment ago. Though Victoria pretended to be happy for her friend, her smile was strained and her gaze spoke of something else. The girl walking beside her was desperate, and it seemed to Stella that Victoria was about to cry. The girl slowed her step, and Vicky automatically did the same, and then they stopped right in the middle of the hallway. The girl put her hand on her friend's shoulder. Vic, I didn't share the news at the wrong time, gently asked Stella. Victoria turned to her colleague and, already not hiding her tears, answered, no, it's okay, really. It's just that you are so happy. And everyone around me, friends, colleagues, customers, and I feel so lonely. Stella's sweet reply was all Stella could manage, and she wrapped her friend in a tight hug. She realized that her friend still couldn't accept the fact that she was infertile. After all, unlike her, who could afford children but didn't want to give birth, Victoria was incapable of doing so. Vicky often told her about her worries about her problem. However, Stella could only comfort her with the fact that she could take a child from an orphanage. And Victoria really thought about it. However, until now she had not taken any drastic action. After all, she didn't just want a child, she wanted a family. Victoria gently pushed Stella away and climbed out of that tight embrace, brushing away another tear. She again put on the mask of an imperious and strong woman, on which, at first glance, you could not tell that she could be so vulnerable. I'm sorry for these emotions. I'm really happy for you, friend. Please don't think I'm jealous or anything. I understand you, Vike, and I'm sure you'll find your happiness. You just don't give up. The girl smiled in return. Her friend rarely called her Vicky. After all, in this abbreviation was something native. It was exactly what her mother called her. Stella decided to leave the girl alone with her thoughts and left under the pretext that she was already expected with the documents. Victoria, on the other hand, continued on her way. Back in her office, Victoria's mind was in a state of reflection. It was true that she supported her friend and was not averse to having children herself. However, the only and most important thing that distinguished her strength from her friend had a loving husband, what Victoria couldn't boast of. It had always been a problem for her. She had a completely unassuming appearance. She was even a little repulsive. However, the girl corrected the situation with her good character and cheerfulness. Victoria looked at herself in the mirror. Curly, red hair, crooked nose with asymmetrical eyebrows. Everything she saw in her reflection, she didn't like. And that was indeed a huge, heavy burden that had accompanied Victoria all her life. After all, no matter what anyone says, appearance plays a paramount role. You look at the cover, and then see you through the mind. Because of that fact, she could never find a man. They'd all run out of dates. The last one didn't even make up an excuse to leave. He just got up and walked out. Of course, if it were possible, as in a game, to show all her excellent qualities and properties, Victoria would not be equal. However, she doesn't live in a simulation, but in the real world, where your soul will only be considered when you attract them with your looks. A knock on the door brought her out of her musings. Emma, who had given birth to a baby girl a few hours ago, came in. She was holding a beautiful package, and Vicky immediately guessed that it was a gift for her labor. But at least somewhere she was truly loved and appreciated. There's our mommy. Victoria happily greeted the girl as she left the table. She wrapped her ward in as tight an embrace as possible. It was not long after the birth, but her patient was already on her feet. What couldn't the other moms boast? Usually they took a long rest. But Emma was a brave and fighting girl. You're out of bed early. Darling, said the midwife. Oh, I'm not tired. Victoria, thanks to you. The birth was so comfortable that I already want to take my baby girl and walk with her. I am so grateful to you for the kindness and care you have given me during the whole 9 months. The girl took out a bag and handed it to her doctor. Victoria began to scrutinize its contents. I decided to buy you some useful oils and cosmetics. I would like to point out that they are of excellent quality. You know me, I don't skimp on my health, Emma said, smiling. Victoria was getting angry with paint. On her face could be seen even a slight surprise her clients often gave her gifts. Emma, however, was special. On the day she had sought help because she couldn't conceive a child, Victoria had been on duty. Of course, she was already a trained professional. However, there were too many women in labor that month, and all the midwives had their hands full. and Emma couldn't catch Victoria, who had been recommended to her by a friend, calling her the best, because the midwife just didn't have time for her. Certainly the girl was quite wealthy and could allow herself any other private clinic. However, she wanted to give birth here, since she herself was born in this very maternity hospital. But still Victoria was able to spare an hour to her visitor, who went to the hospital every day, hoping to find a doctor. "Do you sit in our ward all day long? I take it you are really serious, my dear," Victoria asked the young girl. "Please help me. I want to give birth in this hospital." "Yes, I know. That's why you came to me. I was told you've been unable to conceive for a year." "Yes, please help me. I'll spare no expense. I was assured that you can help," the girl pleaded, almost crying. Victoria looked at her sternly. Then she looked at the documents again, correcting her glasses. "Emma," so the midwife said thoughtfully, then nodded an appraising glance at the poor girl. "I don't care about the size of your wallet. I'll do my best. You follow my orders and you'll have a chance." "Thank you. God sent you." "Thank you, Victoria," Emma screamed. Memories flooded into Victoria's mind. The first ultrasound results, the long-awaited pregnancy. She was infertile, but she knew how to help the poor who longed for family happiness just as she did. That was the love of her work, her outlet. Victoria saved those who had the slightest chance of success, and she always succeeded, sometimes with great difficulty. But she never gave up and eventually became the first doctor in Toronto who could cure infertility. She was talked about in newspapers, on television, in commercials. She was invited to all sorts of foundation events, to shootings, and almost no one she did not refuse, because she knew one truth, which once her mother told her: "If you can help, help. Do not wait for a miracle. You are the miracle." Victoria was so moved by all these thoughts that she let a tear fall. What Emma couldn't help but notice: "Victoria, what are you doing? Please don't cry." "If you didn't like the gift," I stopped the touch of the doctor's hand on the girl. "Emma, thank you for giving me a chance to feel wanted again." Through tears, said midwife. Young mother awkwardly smiled and gave herself permission to feel this moment and wept. "You are an inspiration to many, Victoria. I hope you too can find your happiness. I will miss you," said the girl. And with these warm words left the office. Victoria was alone again. Today's day turned out to be too sad. What the girl did not expect. But having collected herself, she went to the desk where the computer stood and completely went to work. It really helped her to take her mind off her problems. After 2 o'clock of continuous work, the girl noticed a notification in the corner of the screen. Clicking on it, she was taken to her email. She had received an email from a medical association of doctors stating that it was recommended that she take a refresher course. Victoria wasn't surprised by this. Even though she was one of the best obstetricians in town, she often took similar courses. Since technology and knowledge do not stand still, and to stay in the top all the time, you need to keep your theoretical and practical knowledge in shape. So she happily replied to this email saying that she would definitely attend. They were to take place every 24 hours in the evening, starting tomorrow for 24 days. And this schedule suited Victoria quite well, for she was always looking for something to do in the evening, besides going out with her friends, of whom she had many. However, socializing with them made her very tired. Most of them already had children. Half of her friends were born in her own clinic where she works. And of course, all the talk was mostly about their glorious years, which drove Victoria into depression and even more enrollment. The midwife continued her laborious work at the computer, which consisted of filling out various papers. Victoria hated these formalities, as she liked to do other, more useful things rather than filling out new documents like an accountant in an office. However, these formalities had to be observed, and the girl had no choice but to obey them. Her hard and hateful work was again interrupted by a knock at the door. This time a nurse came in, bringing new cards and about the patients. Vicky at first didn't even notice her arrival. But when the young intern was about to leave, opening the door, the midwife stopped her. "Can't I fulfill one request of mine?" Victoria asked politely. The girl turned and looked puzzled at the doctor. "Please make a note at the reception desk that I will be absent every evening for a month. By order of the head doctor of the department. All the documents will throw you to the mail," said Victoria, smiling sleepily at her, looked at her with a look as if she was doing a favor, and walked out. Victoria ignored that look from the nurse. They do get tired in practice. When Vike was in higher education, she too suffered from not having enough to eat, and she could barely do simple tasks, not to mention the fact that she had to smile. Unfortunately, studying to be a doctor is hard. And of course, smiling would not save the situation. So the girl understandably escorted Mew with her eyes until tomorrow. "Miss Wilson," shouted to her the doctor on duty, who remained on duty for the night, while the midwife passed by and went to the elevator. The girl was really tired, and her last words had not pleased Miss at all. Even though Vika was only 30 years old, she felt that she would never be a Mrs. She would never have another last name. She would. It would always be lonely. With these thoughts, she got into a cab and drove home. Her apartment was located in Harbourfront. In Toronto's Central District, she had a swanky apartment with a view of the entire city. Vicky liked to often go out with a cup of cocoa on the balcony and look at the lights of the city at night. "Mom is home," shouted Victoria, closing the front door behind her. Her Cavalier King Charles Spaniel dog immediately came running to her. Quite an expensive pet. However, Vicky didn't feel sorry for the money for the creature that was replacing her friend, husband, and child. "I'm sorry it took so long, my boy was hungry," probably asked Victoria a rhetorical question. But unfortunately, instead of a human answer, received only a proud woof. "Let's go, my joy," said the girl, and with these words led her puppy to the kitchen. Turning on the light, she looked for food for her pet, and to her surprise, found it poured into the food for Arson, who looked at the bowl of food with greedy eyes. She opened a bottle of expensive wine, poured it into a glass, and went to her favorite balcony. This view, which she watched almost every night, could not be described in 2 words. At the very top of the skyscraper, she could not hear the noise of the cars, yet she could watch them moving along the highway. She could see lights in almost every window. Life was boiling before her eyes, and she was not dying of loneliness again. She enjoyed it and was proud of the life she was living, albeit alone. Her train of thought was interrupted by the barking of the doggy, who always did that when the phone rang, who could need her at 0 o'clock. The doctor's work never ends, so the girl still went to the phone. "Victoria Wilson speaking," she answered. "Hello, Ms. Wilson. I apologize for the late call. I need to confirm your enrollment in the course." Victoria, I was beginning to get annoyed. She hated getting calls at this hour, especially for a formality. However, after realizing that the consultant on the other end of the line was not to blame for this and was just doing her job, she answered, "Yes, I confirm that I will be present from tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye." But Victoria hung up. She was really annoyed by that phone call. Why couldn't she have called in the morning? She fell asleep with this mood. Entering the auditorium, Victoria saw quite a few people. Were they all gynecologists and midwives? She took an empty seat with another girl. Vika didn't really look at her neighbor, but managed to notice her beautiful dark hair tied in a ponytail. She was dressed quite openly. She was wearing a tank top and jeans. However, this bow was quite appropriate for the place. For the next hour, there was a sepulchral silence in the auditorium. Everyone listened attentively to the speaker, who looked no more than 35 years old. "That will be the end of our discussion today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for coming." The speaker said goodbye to the doctors. Everyone quickly began to gather. There was a ruckus. Taking all the supplies in the bag, Vicky side-eye, noticed the sight of a neighbor, and turned in her direction. "They woke you up at 12 o'clock last night too?" The neighbor asked with a smile. "Yes, and I thought I was the only lucky one," Victoria said tediously. After yesterday, she didn't want to smile at all, and walked like a zombie all day. Is that why you're in a bad mood too? The perky brunette didn't stop and answered Vika in the same tone, and already wanted to get up and leave. However, she was stopped by a feeling of regret. She rude neighbor on the first day of their acquaintance. Perhaps they will sit together for a month, so she did not want to spoil the relationship. I'm sorry. It had been a rough day. They had to do 2 mom's C-sections, and it was hard to control the process. First time doing a C-section. Victoria was confused by the question. Did the girl doubt her qualifications? She probably just misunderstood her. Oh, just kidding. Don't worry about it. I get tired of my job every time. I take it you're a midwife. Yes, Vika answered with interest. And you're a gynecologist for teenagers. You don't know how hard it is with them. I love children, but they are so shy. Every time I have to pull out of them words, as if obstetrician them with forceps. Still with a smile, the neighbor said, "Oh, I didn't even introduce myself." Samantha Brown introduced herself and raised her hand for a handshake. Victoria Wilson is an obstetrician gynecologist, responded to the girl's handshake, as Samantha formally mouthed her name, laughing. The girls exchanged phone numbers and said goodbye, agreeing to sit next to each other, and tomorrow, the new day passed unnoticed. Victoria didn't do anything special at work. Mostly she fiddled with documents and filled them out. The girl was very much looking forward to meeting her new acquaintance, Samantha. Therefore, as soon as the clock showed 7 o'clock, Vicky immediately closed the laptop and closed the office, rushed to the courses. They were held not far from the maternity hospital where she worked. She only had to walk 1 block. But unfortunately, it started to rain heavily, and Vicky had nothing to cover herself with. However, before she could walk a couple of meters, an umbrella suddenly formed over her head, followed by the person holding the umbrella. It was Samantha. Victoria marveled at her sudden appearance. How did she end up here? Victoria wondered. I work nearby in that hospital over there, the girl said. She pointed to the northeast. So that's the neighboring building of the clinic where I work. So we're not just desk neighbors, said the girl with a wink, to which she got the same smirk in return. Victoria was still surprised that they had been working next to each other all this time and had never met once. She was enjoying this girl's company more and more. After the seminar, her new friend suggested going to a cafe. After all, tomorrow was already Sunday. Of course, the job of a teenage gynecologist was easier than that of a doctor of midwifery. They had the weekend off, unlike Victoria. However, Vicky accepted the invitation because there were no grand plans for Sunday, no labor and delivery surgery, or meeting a new client. All she had to do was fill out paperwork on the computer over and over again, which she absolutely did not want to do. And a cup of coffee with a friend was the perfect excuse to take the day off. Hi, Vicky said hello, sitting down at the table across from her friend. How long have you been waiting for me? She asked, noticing half-drunk and a cup of coffee. Hi, darling. I wasn't particularly thirsty, and the drink had already been served. I'm sorry. Apology accepted, Victoria said with a smile. In the beginning, the dialogue was not at all formed, and it was very awkward. The girls discussed work, the weather, and each other's well-being. However, the conversation became more sincere when the conversation turned to the topic of family. But Vicky suspected that someday their chatter would reach this sensitive topic, so she was prepared for this outcome. So what did we find out? That you like kids. In a good way, Samantha joked, making their time together more relaxed. And you have kids of your own. Or maybe you're planning to. Victoria decided not to rush her answer. She slowly raised the coffee mug to her lips and took a sip, trying to ignore Samantha's eager gaze. There are no children. More accurately muled, the girl said. I'm infertile. That's why I can't even think about having a family. Firmly, she said. She saw Samantha's look of dying embarrassment. However, her friend immediately corrected herself. What about the kids from the orphanage? Or have you always dreamed only of your own children? Are you afraid you won't love them as much as you would if you had your own? I've thought about it, but I can't bring them up alone. I can't cope. And my personal life has been a little strained so far too. Oh, come on. You can do it on your own. I haven't seen my husband in 2 months. He's on a ship that sails around the Japanese islands. And when we see each other, we don't see each other much either. I've got work. He's got things to do. So I do all the household chores myself. And we have 3 dogs. Of course, I understand that they cannot be compared with children. But children, although you will be there at 6 o'clock, but not often ask you to go for a walk with them right away. Otherwise, they wet the hallway or slippers, Samantha said, laughing. So all the care of these little creatures rests on my fragile female shoulders, summarized the girl, taking another sip of fresh emergency coffee. Do you have pets too? Victoria answered enthusiastically. I have a puppy, and he's always asking to go for walks. Samantha, I suggest we walk our pets together. That's a great idea. Vic, where do you live again? Harbor Front, Harbor Point. So you're right downtown. Good for you. My husband and I would need at least 5 years to get a small mortgage on a small apartment. However, I do live close to you. Do you know Young Street? Sure. I walk in the park, and I come out on that street. That's the park. Victoria, we definitely found each other. And from that meeting, the girls bonded. Samantha was only 2 years younger than Victoria, so they didn't feel any age difference. The girls became the closest of friends and did almost everything together. They left work, walked their pets, and often went to visit each other. Once they baked cookies together, which burned, and they laughed about the story for a long time. And Victoria was happier than ever. She used to think she had tons of friends until she met Samantha. She was someone with whom you could share all your problems, knowing that you wouldn't be judged, understood, and supported. In turn, Vicky listened attentively to her friend's worries about her relationship. It turns out that the girl was always worried about the distance between her and her husband, and although almost always managed to hide it, the mask could not be worn forever, and the girl snapped. Since childhood, she dreamed of a family and a cozy home full of love. However, when her husband was sent to serve in the East, their lives changed dramatically. All of Alexandra's promises that they would always be in touch turned to dust. He found himself more and more occupied with his work and less thinking about his wife, who had waited obediently for him for the 2 years they had been married. It was killing him. Samantha was pushing her from the inside out. Though she didn't show it, she felt bad, and Victoria tried with all her might to distract the girl from her unsightly plight, and she was succeeding. Until one unfortunate day that broke Samantha. Nothing unusual had happened that day. Both girls were doing their work, and in the evening they planned to go for a walk, walking down the streets and flying ice cream. They were making plans for tomorrow. However, their fun conversation was interrupted by a phone call. Samantha picked up the phone and moved a little away from her friend, holding her ice cream in her hands with a smile. The girl answered it. She didn't utter a word further. However, by her facial expression, which was gloomier and gloomier with every second, Victoria realized something was wrong. She didn't dare to approach her friend until she dropped the ice cream cone and then collapsed on the pavement. Victoria ran over, snatched the phone from her, which her friend was barely holding, and squatted down in front of her. Samantha didn't even lift her head. When Vika took matters into her own hands and forced her friend to look at her, cupping her cheeks with her hands. It was a look she remembered for a long time. The completely glassy look of a devastated person. It was as if her friend was looking through her. Suddenly, the girl's eyes ran out, and she lost consciousness. Victoria barely had time to pick the girl up before her head collided with the hot sidewalk. It was only now that the midwife noticed that a circle of people had formed around them, as if it was some kind of show. "There are men here to help me." She turned to the crowd. Only one man came out to answer her question. A boy in his 20s. Pretty pumped up, though, and that could easily be seen in his muscular build, highlighting, rushing underneath a snow-white t-shirt. Pick her up and help me carry her to the car." "I'll call a cab now," the girl explained. The guy followed her instructions, and in 5 minutes Victoria was already riding in the car, and on her lap lay a friend, still unconscious. Vicky couldn't understand what it was that had shaken her so much. She was lost in speculation, but convinced herself that it was necessary to give her friend first aid, and then think about the causes of this terrible condition. The girl gave the cab driver her address and asked him to help her lift her friend to her floor. The cab driver was begging, but for an additional fee agreed. "But she's a Ms. Pinchuk too. Watch your girlfriend more carefully," the cab driver remarked as he led the girl up to the apartment. Victoria had no choice but to make a strained smile that screamed, "Get lost." The cab driver seemed to take the hint and departed, wishing the girl good night. Victoria, on the other hand, barely dragged her friend to the bed, and as soon as she put her to bed, she collapsed next to her. It turns out that to carry a drunken person, you need a good physical preparation. However, the girl lay only a few minutes, during which she gave herself a break before a new difficult task. "I had to at least get Samantha out of her jeans and get her comfortable. I pulled off my friend's shoes and jeans." The girl put her head on a soft pillow and covered her with a blanket, and then lay down next to her. The next morning, Victoria woke up with a terrible headache. She opened her phone and saw 30 missed calls from Lily, her fellow midwife. It was then that the girl realized how badly she had blundered. Plans had completely slipped her mind. Today, she had to be present at the hospital as early as 7 o'clock because Maria was going to come to them, who was going to give birth the other day, or rather to lie under the surgical knife, because she was going to have a C-section. Vika looked at the clock, which showed 11 o'clock in the afternoon. The horror. She might be fired. The girl got up in a flash and ran to the kitchen, where she saw Samantha sitting at the table. Her eyes were still staring into the void. She didn't even seem to notice her friend's presence. Samantha cautiously called out to the girl Victoria. Her friend turned around. The midwife again saw that same glassy stare of the shattered man. She decided to take a seat at the table and gently inquire what had happened. She was no longer worried about her job or the fact that she might get fired. Right now, she was only thinking about her condition and her friend who clearly needed help. The silence lasted a minute, and only Victoria was about to say something. Samantha gave it away. "He's dead." Quietly, almost in a whisper, the girl said, "My husband, he's dead." Victoria was stunned by this news. Her eyes rounded and her breathing became very heavy. She realized why her friend looked like a corpse. Alexander had died. Those words like a bullet van get into Victoria over and over again. He was the only person who, though far away, mentally supported Samantha. She clung to him like a lifeline. He was very close to her, and the only person who truly loved her deeply and for a long time. And not even distance could break their soul connection. "Samantha, I'm so sorry." But her friend didn't seem to be listening to Victoria at all. "I feel sick." Suddenly, the girl blurted out and rushed to the bathroom. Victoria heard the sounds of vomiting. This news really hit her hard. Tonight she had fainted. Today she threw up. The midwife realized that she was now responsible for her friend's condition, both physically and mentally. "I'm sorry, it's very embarrassing." "I in your apartment," began to apologize girl, returning to the table on the move, rubbing her chin, which she washed with water. "Nothing." Victoria nodded understandingly. She felt sorry for the girl, but she was a midwife, not a psychologist, and didn't know what was best to say in situations like this. She didn't want to hurt or make it any worse, so breakfast passed in silence. When Samantha got ready, all in the same silence, Victoria stopped her in the hallway. "You don't want to talk right now, I understand. However, remember that you can always turn to me for support. I'm here for you." "Thank you, Vika. You're my only comfort. I love you," the girl replied, hugged her friend and left the apartment, leaving behind her the condensed smell of her favorite perfume. "Where have you been?" shouted Lily, all the time catching up with Victoria, as she was walking very fast, almost running. I'm not going to discuss this with you. Lily, I'm drawing the whole situation to the head doctor. If you want, you can eavesdrop outside the door. Just be careful, or the adults might scold you. Victoria answered wryly. She had never liked Lilia as a person. She was very slippery and dodgy and cunning. And she was always eager to listen to gossip or to start a ridiculous rumor herself. The midwife didn't trust her with any secret or news, because in an hour the whole hospital, or even worse, the whole neighborhood would know about it. You've been rougher than usual today. I'm prepared to be rude to you. Always, my dear, but not in front of my clients, Victoria said, pointing to several girls who were sitting in the waiting room waiting for their paperwork to be done at the front desk. Very soon, they won't be yours anymore, Vic. The girl said meaningfully and walked away in the opposite direction. Lilia and Victoria had always been work rivals. They were both doctors of the highest category of obstetrician. However, Lilia differed in that she mostly delivered babies. Whatever Victoria did, who was a step higher and only supervised everyone in a separate ward. And about them, there were always disputes, who was the best and who really should be in charge in the maternity ward. And so Victoria had punctured herself and the clients were served by Lily, which Vike was not at all happy about. She was furious. She was afraid she was really going to lose her place. However, that morning, no matter how it was, circumstances demanded that she did not show up for work at the proper time. The girl simply couldn't leave her friend alone. Her conscience would have tormented her. For now, however, Samantha had the excuse of absence from work. Victoria did not have one, and in her heart she hoped that the head doctor took pity on her and would understand the situation. So you missed your work shift without answering the phone or even notifying your superiors to support your friend. Yes, ma'am, that's exactly how Victoria responded. Are we in kindergarten? Raised her voice the head of the department, madam. I am a qualified specialist. And so you think that now you can come to work whenever you want. There was silence in the office. Victoria did not know what to answer such a nasty question. Victoria started as a doctor. I will not fire you, however. I have to punish you. You will lose all the female clients who wanted to sign up with you this month, and you must also pay a fine of $50,000. The midwife was shocked at the turn of events. She'll pay the money. It had never been a problem for her, but that's not what bothered her. She resented being humiliated for one mistake. She would rather be fired than have the girls she really wanted to work with taken away. She wondered who would serve her customers in this case, to which she received Lily's cruel and annoying answer. She has the same qualifications as you, so she could very well be promoted to the role of Dr. Midwife. Are you saying you understand me? Yes, Victoria, I understand. Our clinic needs doctors who are punctual and responsible. And if everyone does what you do, our hospital won't be considered one of the best in Toronto. But I've only missed work once. So why the cruel punishment? Doesn't 10 years of continuous service count for something? I don't want to talk to you like a schoolgirl, Victoria. And that's exactly what you're doing right now. Unless you want to make things worse. Accept these new conditions and live in peace. Victoria once again gave the head doctor an indignant look. She couldn't even imagine that such a minor slip would remove her from her position as the leading obstetrician doctor, the position she had worked in for the past 5 years. As she walked out of the office, the girl saw Lily standing on the right side of the door. Apparently, the advice to eavesdrop on the conversation this girl had taken literally. And only then did Victoria realize that Lily must have already known everything. After all, who else but her had ratted out to the head doctor of the department that the employee wasn't at work? It was dishonest, mean, and nasty. But there was nothing the midwife could do about it. And, ignoring Lily's defeated looks, she merged into her office. In the evening, Vike tried to call herself, but her friend did not pick up the phone. And the girl concluded that the last thing Sam wanted to hear was platitudes about how everything would be fine and everything would work out. The girl hoped that her friend was fine, and she just turned off her phone. However, the anxiety did not go anywhere, but still Victoria decided to go to bed. The next working day surprised the girl even more. To be more precise, she was impressed by her friend's courage. "Victoria, you are our host again, Dr. Obstetrician, but please do not be late for work and do not bother me for nothing." Quickly, the head doctor prepared the apparatus. Barely opening the door of Victoria's office, the girl didn't even see her face. Of course, she was amazed and delighted by this news, and in a minute she was already running around the department, trying to find answers. "Why?" she asked loudly, peering into the head doctor's office. "Why did you change your mind?" When the door opened fully, the girl saw someone she absolutely did not expect to see in this building. It was Samantha. Her friend smiled at her and got up from her chair. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm glad we understood each other." And the girl walked towards the exit of the office, towards the shocked and Victoria. "Why did you do that?" asked Victoria. As they walked down the hall, "You helped me, and after hearing about your problem, I decided to return the favor. We went to school together. You didn't know. She owed me something." Samantha smiled slyly. The girls entered Vicky's office. Vicky settled into the desk, and Samantha nestled us into the client chair. "But that wasn't my goal from the beginning," her friend continued. "I came to the hospital to give you some news, but I overheard from the staff that you'd been demoted, so I decided to find out why. And as you can see, it was not in vain." Victoria seemed to have missed the whole rant. What news? There was silence in the office. It was obvious that Samantha was gathering her courage to announce something very important. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come to the hospital during working hours and in this condition. "I'm pregnant, Vicky." Victoria glanced at her friend and sank further into the chair. So it pitifully scripted the pool. She had expected everything. That Alexander had survived or Samantha had been informed where to pick up his body. However, this took her by surprise. She couldn't have even imagined such an outcome. And of course, she felt even more sympathy for Samantha, who had so many problems dumped on her in an instant. She wanted to hug the girl, to support her. However, she only said it aloud. "What's the time limit?" 2 months. Samantha said. "I haven't seen Alexander for exactly 2 months." As if anticipating the next question, the girl added, "I mean, yes, it's his child. But I'm not here to listen to tearful speeches and sympathy for my loss." Victoria quietly sighed in relief. She really wanted to support her friend. However, now, after so many events, the girl could only listen to her. "I came here," Samantha continued, "to ask you to be my doctor. I want you to manage the pregnancy from start to finish." However, seeing Victoria's eyes, which were rounding more and more with every second, the pal added, "You're my friend, and I'll be quiet." Vika stopped her. She went to her friend, hugged her tightly, and allowed herself to let a tear fall. "I'll do anything for you, Samantha." 2 months passed. The girls grew even closer. Victoria helped herself as much as she could. An ultrasound revealed that Samantha was expecting twins. Finally, it was time to find out the sex of the babies. Victoria offered her friends to make a gender party where they would find out in a solemn atmosphere. Samantha, however, refused. She still couldn't accept her husband's death. She didn't want to have any celebrations without him. They had planned to do everything together, but their whole life had collapsed in an instant, and the girl couldn't afford to party without him just yet. And of course, this holiday was unlikely to end in bright, hearty laughter. Samantha had frequent breakdowns, and she wouldn't be able to contain herself after finding out the sex of her babies. "Okay, you're all set. You can lie down." The midwife invited Samantha onto the couch. She smeared the girl's belly with special helium and began to drive the probe at the same time. Looking at the screen where the picture was coming up, "Are you ready, Sam?" Victoria asked. Her friend looked at her joyfully. However, in that look there was not only happiness, but also the bitterness of the loss of the treaty. "Not a shadow. You have twin boys. Boys." Samantha screamed with happiness and asked her friend to print out their pictures. She was out of her mind. Joy overwhelmed her. It truly was a miracle. Months went by. Each day brought the incredible joy of impending motherhood. Victoria helped the girl set up the baby's room. They bought a crib and many different accessories. Vicky even helped her friend with money. And finally, the day of labor came. Okay, I'll say it again. Contractions are normal. Your water broke, and they're taking you to a private room, Victoria told her friend, as she was wheeled down the hall on a couch with wheels. Push, push, shouted midwife Lily, pulling out the first and then the second baby. Finally, Samantha was relieved. Victoria picked up the twins and placed them on her mother's chest. After what seemed like a minute, however, the machine abruptly replaced. All the doctors in the room fussed. Her blood pressure is dropping, shouted excited voices. She's lost too much blood. Give me the medication. Sarah, there was panic. In this chaos, Samantha tugged Valerie, who had been by Vicky's side the whole time, by the forearm. I'm losing consciousness. Please, under no circumstances, give them to my parents. Promise me that you will take care of them, please. I beg you, don't give them to my parents. You don't know what they're like. Victoria was horrified by what was happening. She'd never had a patient die before. And now why? Why did it have to be her only friend? But that wasn't what was required of her right now. And Victoria, though she was ready to panic, gathered all her will into a fist and answered with a firm grip on her friend's palm. I promise they'll be in good hands. As soon as Vicky uttered that short phrase, Samantha cut her off, rushed to pump, and carried the twins to safety. Heartbeat. The rhythm is weak, but steady. Looks like she's slipped into a coma. Lily's fait accompli was brutally stated. A month passed. Samantha was still in a coma. All the while, Victoria felt devastated. She went to work like a zombie. She came back from it in exactly the same condition. 2 weeks ago, however, she had an idea. It was crazy and terrifying, and Victoria had little faith in the success of this operation. However, she was willing to commit for her friend. She looks like a baby. Yes, it was certainly a crime. But the girl simply saw no other way out. Victoria quickly found buyers for 2 apartments, which she had her own and inherited from her mother, and at a very similar price. On the night of April 5, when it was exactly 1 month since the birth of the kids, the girl began to take active steps. To begin with, Victoria stayed at work at night substituting someone who turned up by the way. This time was enough for her to find birth certificates and forged documents. She put her name in the mother's column, and she was able to do it because she had access to the documentation. And even here, Samantha helped her. After all, if her friend hadn't persuaded the head doctor to leave Vika's position as a physician midwife, she wouldn't be as omnipotent as she was now. She was in charge of all the baby-related paperwork that saw the light of day at this clinic, and that played to her advantage. The guards' guests had coffee with Irish liquor, which was very tasty. However, with a strong sleeping pill, the girl was able to free herself for a few hours by swiping her card on the electronic lock that closed the doors leading to the room with an oxygen box. She entered the room and looked for the children who were signed as Samantha Brown. Once she found them, she carefully dressed each sleeping baby, covered their faces with oxygen masks, and placed them in the double stroller. Now she was left with the single most difficult task of the night to get out of the hospital. She had no hope of going completely unnoticed. She only prayed to God that the guard at the main entrance would notice her a minute later, when she could get into a cab. And he did, walking with a smirk. The guard at the building's exit asked. The girl answered with a hesitant nod and left the hospital as quickly as possible. As Victoria had expected, the guard stirred up the whole place later. While she was getting into a cab, the big man jumped out of the building and ran towards her, shouting, "You don't have children." "Victoria, stop. What are you doing?" But Vika ignored the screams. She was driven by excitement. She had it all worked out. But that was only the beginning of the plan. Now, while the sleepy cab driver took the girl to the place where her car was waiting for them, Victoria's main goal was to get away quickly and quietly so that the police and the others would wake up. already later, paying the cab driver twice as much, hoping that he wouldn't blab about the incident, which was unlikely because he didn't seem to care about anything. Victoria escorted the car out with a glance and made sure the man was gone. She opened the lane that her BMW had covered. Her faithful dog, Aaron, was already waiting there. And the twins were still sleeping peacefully as well. No amount of chasing could wake them up, it seemed, carefully putting them in the already prepared sleeping places. Victoria got behind the wheel. Beside her sat her pet. They looked like a gang from a gangster movie. The partner, of course, was Aaron, laughing a little at their thought. The girl backed up, turned around, and drove down the highway, picking up speed with each passing second. Her path lay to the airport. Standing at the checkpoint, the girl was very nervous. However, she was reassured by the fact that she looked like the truest mother. "So they are a month old?" the customs official asked sternly. "Yes, sir," replied Victoria. The girl did not give any further comments, afraid to say anything unnecessary. "And for what purpose are you going to Istanbul?" "My friend and I had an agreement that when my babies are a month old, I will visit her in Istanbul to show her my younger ones. I mean, a visit to a friend." The officer made a disgruntled grimace. However, when he looked at the documents, a faint smile appeared on his face. "Have a good trip, Mrs. Wilson." The girl gave him a smile, and as soon as she crossed the line, she exhaled a sigh of relief. He called her Mrs. A new one was beginning. The head in her life is happy, much happier than before, and she's ready for this change. "So, kids, this is our new apartment for the next 18 years, declared Vika when she was finally given the keys to the apartment. The property Victoria had purchased here was very spacious. 4 bedrooms, a huge kitchen adjacent to the living room, and of course, a panoramic view of Istanbul. Another window on the opposite side of the apartment overlooked the Bosphorus Strait. She had chosen this city for many reasons. First, this country needed highly skilled doctors. Secondly, the warm climate that Victoria loved so much was excellent here. Well, of course, and Istanbul, as the locals called it, was a very cozy and colorful city, which also added its own special charm by putting the children in the pre-prepared cribs, which she had asked to be placed in the nursery before she arrived. She turned on the TV and sat down on the couch as she suspected she would. The news channels were already buzzing about the stolen twins. It had been exactly 24 hours since her successful abduction. Given the time zones, and while everyone in Toronto was just waking up and listening to the horrifying news, Victoria was drinking delicious tea in her new apartment, and the bright afternoon sun was shining outside the window. "What, Sharon? It's about time we had a makeover," the girl said triumphantly. Of course, the change of appearance is not a quick thing. That's why Victoria only shaved off her long, thick hair and made herself a beautiful short bob, which was dyed black. So how can hair dramatically change the appearance? Vika was no longer at all like the former midwife from Toronto. Victoria went to Turkey for a reason. As a child, her mother often took her with her on business trips, and very often they lived in Istanbul. Therefore, young Vicky got language practice on the streets of this city. It was this city that she remembered most of all. She had always dreamed of living here, but her career took shape in Toronto, and she forgot her childhood dreams. Istanbul was teeming with tourists, and the population was over 14 million. It was easy to hide here from the police who were now looking for her. A couple months passed. Victoria found a job at the private memorial hospital. Of course, she didn't yet hold the position she had in Toronto. However, she could already boast of success at work. Canadian authorities were still looking for her, but never found her. Who would pay attention to a mother with 2 infants? There were 1 million of them in Istanbul, but sometimes people wondered who the father of these children was, to which Victoria replied that he had died tragically in a submarine, which was true. However, with one of the including circumstances, it was not her husband, and she did not even know what he looked like. But everyone doesn't need to know that. She did, however, often contemplate a drastic change in appearance. She could do a new hairstyle, a different makeup. But her facial features remained the same, and she needed to change that. And after a few months of living in Turkey, Victoria finally decided to take this step. Part of the money she received from the sale of her property and car, she invested in her face, her new beautiful face, which she really liked. She was no longer the ugly girl that no one wants to even meet. Now she was a beautiful Turk. Straight nose, high cheekbones, bushy eyebrows, eyes almost black from her contact lenses. And her skin was already naturally swarthy. And now she was already a heroine of Turkish TV series. Now all men looked at her as she walked along the streets of the city. Many wanted to talk to her, but so far she did not risk her position, because at any moment she could be twisted. Even though she had changed her appearance, she had lived like this for several years. Her quiet and happy life as a single mother brought her nothing but pleasure. Over the years, she was able to rise to the position of lead obstetrician and was again in charge of the department. She improved her skills in Turkish, and it was hard to distinguish her from a native speaker. The boys she named Michael and Joseph. These two names carried a certain value to her. Her favorite uncle's name was Michael, and Joseph was her father, who died tragically in a car accident. The boys grew up well-mannered, obedient. The woman always loved children, so she knew how to bring them up. They spoke English and Turkish equally fluently and correctly. This was the year they were to go to school, and even though the children were bilingual, Victoria decided to send them to a school for foreigners where the instruction was in English. She hoped that her children would want to travel, and for that they would definitely need well-practiced English, the world's premier international language. All the paperwork is in the rehabilitation department. The nurse mumbled and left the office. Victoria had no choice but to follow them. Passing by one of the wards in the doorway, she noticed a handsome man and for some reason decided to look in. She herself did not know what the motive for this action was, but she was instinctively drawn to the door. He was a pumped-up brunette. You could tell by the muscles that peeked out from beneath the hospital pajamas that barely covered his strong body. He had a scar on his very temple. With his hand, he clutched and squeezed the rubber bands that were tied to each of his fingers. He clenched his fist and clenched it again. And these simple actions completed Victoria with their beauty. Then Victoria saw the coach who had been making remarks to this match all this time. And suddenly, the man's gaze met the girl's eyes. She immediately closed the door and, shy as a schoolgirl, wandered down the corridor further, not understanding why this man caused such feelings in her. It was a couple of days after the incident and Victoria was back in the office. She had to sign some papers at the front desk. But deep down, she secretly hoped to meet that handsome man. And her wish came true. While she was signing another document at the counter, this stranger came over and stood next to Vicky. She pretended not to notice him, but tried to hide a smile. Well, the man took a ride. And you work here. The woman still pretended to be very busy and scrutinized the documents. And only for a moment, throwing a glance at him, said yes, with. And again she went deep into the study of papers. However, that fleeting glance of his beautiful blue eyes was enough to make the girl's heart beat frequently. She was even afraid that this knocking was too loud and ran away, citing urgent matters. In the following days, the girl began to visit the rehabilitation units more and more often. Always called to pick up some papers or help, although it was not part of her duties. "Vike, why did you like him so much?" asked a girl at the front desk. Since they saw each other almost every day, they could already be called friends. However, Victoria did not allow any close connection. She was broken after her friendship with Samantha had been tragically cut short. "I'm sorry, but it's impossible not to notice the way you look at him, especially since you've started showing up here every day. Even though your department is in a completely different wing of the hospital, it's so noticeable." The midwife's getting very excited. "No, I'm the only one who's noticed so far." "Well, maybe he has," the girl said, allowing herself a chuckle. Victoria didn't understand why she was giggling at first. However, following her gaze, she turned around and saw his man, her dream man. She had already recognized the fact that she was indeed head over heels in love with him, even though she didn't even know his name. The girl was very embarrassed when their eyes met and immediately turned away. "Why didn't you say so?" Vicky whispered fiercely to her friend in the ward. "Oh, I can't believe you two are so funny." The SHA receptionist also quietly replied to her. Victoria gave her a judgmental look. Only she had the right to judge whether they were funny or not. Though no, it was already like a teenage crush in high school. "Okay, I can help," the girl offered. "But I'm not a matchmaker. I'll just tell you what I know. Would you like that?" "Of course I do," Victoria agreed, and apparently too loudly, because some of the customers turned to look at her. "Yes, more quietly," the girl said. "His name is Antonio. He's been in rehab with us for a month now. He had one foot amputated. No one knows why. But all our nurses are very eager to find out what terrible thing happened in his life." "What nurses?" "Oh, you're not the only one looking to be his girlfriend. He's handsome. That's a fact. And his lack of limbs doesn't interfere with his other physiological abilities. If you know what I'm talking about," said the girl with a wink. "What a naughty Susie you are. Anyway, I suggest you act quickly. Otherwise, this half-god will be taken away." Victoria was confused by the new details. First of all, she finally knew the name of her lover, but she was outraged by the boldness of the nurses. Once again signing the papers, she dragged them to the labor and delivery room a moment later, and all the papers were on the floor. "Oh dear, I'm sorry. Please excuse me. I didn't see you," spoke a deep, low voice. Vicky looked at the man and almost fainted. It was Antonio. His sky-blue eyes were looking straight at her. She could barely breathe. "It was my own fault. I didn't look where I was going. Maybe I could apologize to you over a nice cup of coffee." This divine man offered coffee. The girl hesitantly interjected, "There's a wonderful coffee shop up ahead. I thought you worked at that hospital. You've never been there." The woman did not explain to him that she worked in a completely different department and that she came here only for him. "But when I realized it was a chance, I just said, 'Sure, I'm on my lunch break.'" And then he started rocking back and forth to keep his balance. With a laugh, Antonio finished his story. Victoria had been laughing nonstop for about 20 minutes. She didn't think their dialogue could be so amazingly serene. It had been since their first date. Or rather, not really a date, since they were just having coffee in the clinic's coffee shop and eating. To the girl, however, this meeting seemed exactly like a romantic date. Such coffee breaks began to happen more and more often. And the day came when he invited her to have dinner in a restaurant instead of a coffee shop, arguing that he wanted to diversify his boring hospital life. But of course, Victoria realized that this was the real date she had been waiting for. They started going out together on weekends, eating ice cream, watching sunsets at the Strait, and Vicky felt like she had finally found love, true love, mutual love. She introduced him to her children, with whom Antonio immediately found a common language and her expectation of real family happiness. It finally came true. Already after 2 months of such dates and meetings, the man of her dreams made her an offer. Their wedding was to take place at the end of the month. Victoria very responsibly approached this event. Most of the time she chose the wedding dress and set the very image of the bride. And all other matters were handled by Antonio. He was well provided for after his military service, and though Victoria never got to know his past because it was a very sore subject for him, she was happy to be close to such a wonderful man who she loved and who loved her. The wedding was modest by the standards of Istanbul. It was attended only by her closest family and friends, if they could be called that, but rather buddies and co-workers. Yes, Victoria's children. However, it was a really decent, good wedding of two people in love with each other. Antonio accepted her children as his own and began to raise them, as well as Vicky did. They were wonderful parents and a very friendly family with love and comfort and peace. However, their happiness did not last long. On one of the usual unremarkable days, our couple noticed that they were being watched. Nothing special seemed to be happening. However, the unpleasant feeling that they were not alone did not leave them for a minute. Their car was always followed by another car with different license plates, but always black and with tinted windows. Cautious footsteps were heard behind them, and suspicious figures crouched near the entrance of the house where they lived. They forbade the children to go out, to walk later than 9 p.m. That was the time it was starting to get dark. Victoria thought it was already paranoia. She never told her husband about her past, nor did he about his. He didn't know anything about her children or where she was from, so she was really quite worried about this surveillance. What if the authorities had found her after all? But was that possible after all these quiet years? It seemed unthinkable. Antonio reassured her that she was probably just stressed out at work. That's why it seemed absurd. 2 days later, however, their worst fears were confirmed. Victoria was making cookies in the kitchen with the children as suddenly rang the doorbell. Most likely, it was Antonio who came from a walk with the dog and forgot his keys. Vicky thought, Joseph Sonny would be kind enough to open the door for Daddy, because I have all my hands in the dough, asked the woman. The boy under the squabbles ran to the door to finally meet his father from his walk. He didn't take the children with him, because the boys were a little sick, and Joseph had already missed his father. But when the little boy opened the door, he was very surprised. Behind it stood a man in a black cap and a black strict suit. It was not his father. The man seemed strange to the boy. It was rare to see people wearing such clothes in Istanbul in summer. Mom, can you come here? Joseph called out to his mother. Victoria was a little annoyed because she had to wash her hands urgently from the dough that had flown in. She left Michael to keep an eye on the spiritual and herself headed to her son's call. Yes, son, what's wrong? However, all questions instantly fell away when she saw the man in the suit. She knew it was the end. She had been found, but she kept her nerve and dared to speak to the stranger first. Good afternoon. Did you want something? Strictly asked Vika, putting her arm around her son's shoulders as if to let him know I'm with you. Are you safe? Victoria Wilson. Yes. Mr. Jerry Smith, private investigator. May I come in? Without waiting for an answer, the man thought he'd been let in and tried to walk over the threshold. But Victoria stopped him. No, I won't. Not until you tell me the purpose of your visit, the woman said in a stern tone. I'm here on Samantha Brown's case. Do you know her? Vike almost fainted. She felt dizzy and nauseous. She tried to keep her balance and spoke quickly. Please come in. Victoria led the man into the living room and asked the boys to stay in their rooms. This was a conversation they definitely didn't need to hear. But most of all, she was worried about her husband. If he found out, it would be a disaster. It turns out she had been lying to him all along. The girl put the unexpected guest on the sofa and offered him tea or something stronger, but received a polite refusal. Then the woman took a soft drink from the bar and poured it into a glass. I'm listening to you carefully, Victoria said, sinking down on the sofa. I understand that you are aware of the situation, and there is no point in explaining anything to you. Victoria understood perfectly well what was going on, but she had no idea whose interests this man represented. If he's a private investigator, he's not working for the government. No, sir, I don't understand at all what you told Vicky to do. What did the man with his fingers crossed start? Well, let's start at the beginning. I'll repeat my question. Have you met Samantha Brown? The midwife decided not to be deceitful. Yes, or rather, I did at one time. Then I'm sure you know what we're going to be talking about. I'm a representative of an organization that specializes in finding missing people. 3 years ago, an elderly couple came to me asking for my help, and I couldn't say no. They were Samantha Brown's parents, who had been searching for their kidnapped grandchildren for years. They had lost all hope of success. However, as I said, I'm a private detective, and it's my specialty to deal with such matters. The detective changed his posture and put one foot on the other. At that moment, Victoria heard footsteps. Vicky called out to the shocked and husbandwoman. "Who is it? Where are the children?" Victoria took a deep breath. She realized that she was about to have a tough conversation. It would most likely be followed by yelling and relationship proceedings. She was ready. "Children in their rooms, dear, as a private detective. Sit down and try to calmly absorb the situation." Antonio nervously sat down on the couch and began to examine the man as if it was his wife's lover. When he realized that this man was really who he said he was, he nodded and signaled for the detective to begin his speech. "I take it you're her husband, but it doesn't matter. I'll continue. An unfortunate mother fell into a coma after giving birth 8 years ago. A month afterward, her newborn twin babies were abducted." The man emphasized the last word in his voice. Police and authorities tried for a long time to find the kidnapper, but without success. After a year, the poor mother woke up and regained consciousness. Her parents began an active search for their grandchildren, which again led to a deplorable result. Then they decided to turn to me, and I was finally able to complete this terribly difficult and confusing case. "Sir, wait, I'm sorry, but I don't understand how my wife and I fit into this whole story. And what are you doing in my house?" "Mr. Wilson, I was hoping your wife would share her past history with you, but obviously, I'm going to have to do it for her now. No doubt this will be doubly painful for you. But Ms. Wilson has made her own choice." Victoria looked at the detective with a pleading look, but he was adamant. "Does the name Samantha Brown mean anything to you?" The detective asked her husband. Antonio's heart beat more frequently, and his breathing began to be interrupted. He hadn't heard that name in a very long time, and thought he would never hear it again. "I take it you haven't told your wife anything either?" The man in the black suit continued in a sarcastic tone. "You two make a nice couple. You're just like Mrs. and Mrs. Smith. Exactly the same. Only the backstory's different." Mockingly, he added, "Well, I'll shed some light on each other's dark secrets for you, and hopefully there won't be a bitter war here afterward. Remember that there are children in the house." The couple looked at each other puzzled. Their eyes read questions and fear of being bothered. "So Victoria, let's start with you. First, and I think the most important thing you should know about your husband is his real name. Your Antonio is not Antonio. He changed his name. His name used to be Alexander, and he is the legal husband of your old friend Samantha Brown. Yes, you knew he was dead, I understand, but he survived that terrible explosion. Why do you think he had to have his foot amputated?" Victoria's eyes were filled with horror. She was in shock. She couldn't get her head around the information she'd received. Her husband is also the husband of her best friend, whom she thought was dead. Her husband is alive. But 8 years ago, they were told he died in a submarine. And it's good for you, Antonio, or as we've already established, Alexander, to know that the children you thought were her birth children are your and Samantha's babies. Victoria was the kidnapper. She was the one who snatched them that night. It was her request. She asked me to do it, Victoria shouted back. Alexander was also shocked by more and more facts. Not only had his wife been lying to him all along, but his ex-wife, whom he thought had died in childbirth, turned out to be alive and well, and still his legally documented spouse. The man looked at Victoria down the cheek of his beloved, and slowly a lone tear rolled down. Today they had both learned things about each other, something they should have never learned. It was supposed to be in the past forever, but it seems life likes to throw in unexpected surprises. I guess you have a lot to think about now. The trial in this case is scheduled for next Monday, 1 week exactly. Don't try to escape or do anything. You've already been found, and now you're nowhere to be found. Especially you, Victoria. We will find you, and we will find you quickly, wherever you are in the world. And one more small clarification. With a sneer, said the detective, I was about to leave this apartment. I forgot to tell you that both of you are under house arrest and the apartments are under 24-hour surveillance. But why didn't Samantha find me in that time? Why didn't she tell me she was out of her coma? Asked Vike in the slightest of tones, seeing off the man who had just ripped her life to shreds. That sweetheart, I can't know for sure, but think for yourself. Who would want to be nice to the kidnappers of their own children? But I didn't visit them. The woman cried out. That's what you'll prove in court the rest of the day. I think I've made a difference in your relationship. You bastard, whispered Victoria. You will. Explain to me what that was all about, said the man as the door closed behind the sudden visitor. First, you explain to me how the hell you ended up alive. No, I'm serious. How the hell did you survive? Samantha said you exploded in a submarine. You'd think, wouldn't you? It's my fault I survived that horrible day. Alexander started screaming. I was picked up by a Japanese ship. Already calmer, he said, seeing his wife's frightened eyes. I had to have my feet amputated and was treated for a long time. But I am alive. I tried to contact Samantha for a long time, but because of my illness, it was very difficult to do so. I couldn't even remember who I was or where I was. But then a chance came up, and I went to Toronto, my hometown. I immediately went to see Samantha, my wife. However, her parents, who had always been horrible tyrants and despots, told me that she had passed away in childbirth and the baby had not survived either. And then, to forget my grief, I started traveling the world and stopped in Istanbul, where I met you. Sadly, said the man and looked sorrowfully and piercingly. Oh my God. It was all Victoria could say. Vicky, I'm sorry, but I need to be alone. Don't wait up for me tonight. I'll get a hotel room. Tell our children I love them. All this means the end. Victoria screamed in rage. Now you lay me my children. They are only your children now. They've always been mine, and you have nothing to do with them. Angrily said the man. And with those words he slammed the front door loudly. Victoria almost collapsed on the couch and hid her head in her hands. She wanted to sob, wanted to throw herself out of the window, but she realized she would do none of that. Her boys were here, and they needed her. She needed to resolve the situation she had created as soon as possible. Would she never be able to be happy? The man she loved more than life turned out to be the husband, her best friend, and the father of her children. To think she had turned that thought in her head many times and couldn't find an explanation as to why life had been so cruel to her. She didn't deserve simple domestic bliss. And at one point, Victoria had an idea. She found the right phone number in an old notebook and dialed the number. The dial tone started ringing. You've reached Samantha Brown. Leave a message because I'm busy right now and can't take your call. The voice on the other end of the phone spoke, and the call went to voicemail. Vika hated it as much as she hated speaking words into a soulless mechanical void, leaving them unanswered. Today, however, she had no choice. Hello, Samantha. It's Victoria. Victoria Wilson. Your best friend. Ex-best friend. Victoria bitterly clarified. Call me back as soon as you can. I need to talk to you about something. The woman pressed reset. Now all she had to do was wait for the call. She looked up and saw Michael. Mom, where's that man? Why isn't Daddy here yet? Asked her son. Daddy is not coming today, dear. He was called to work. The girl lied. A tear rolled down her cheek. Mommy, are you crying? Concerned son asked. The distraught mother came running up. Did Daddy upset you? Yes. I'm sure he didn't mean to, Mom. It's gonna be okay. The woman cried. She never allowed herself to show weakness in the presence of children. However, today Victoria just couldn't hold back her tears. Michael leaned his head on his mother's shoulder. He felt very sorry for her, but he did not know how to help her. And Joseph is sleeping. After a while, Vike inquired, having calmed down a little. He always sleeps at 12 o'clock. You know that, smiled Michael. The girl gave her son a smile. Would she be deprived of these beautiful creatures that could make anyone happy on the worst day? She couldn't believe this was all happening to her. She wanted to wake up from this nightmare, but she realized that this was a cruel reality. A reality in which she would now have to live as she wandered aimlessly around the apartment. Vika looked at her phone. There was one notification reflected there. She had gotten voice messages. It didn't take a detective to realize it was Samantha. She pressed listen. Yeah, hi Victoria. I'm in Istanbul right now. I think I guessed that beautiful city. I suggest we meet tomorrow at 4:30 for coffee at the Mickey Mouse Family Cafe. That's the message. Samantha was not generous with words. Victoria realized that she was facing a difficult meeting that could surely affect the rest of her life. The next day, Vicky woke up very early. She could never sleep more than 6 o'clock, a doctor's habit. But after yesterday, which had turned her life upside down, she could barely sleep and only dozed off before dawn. So her head just split open. Antonio Alexander never came back, and she had no idea where he was. This day, she went from working all morning. She didn't know where to take herself. After making the kids breakfast and sending them off to school, she was left home all alone. Victoria turned on the TV and watched some endless series. She always did this when she was stressed. It was a kind of way to disconnect from the real world. It was 6 o'clock. The kids were already back from school. She fed them lunch and sent them off to do their homework. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly. Finally, the clock struck 3 times, and Victoria was finally able to leave the house. The man in black loomed outside the house again, but he did not prevent her. Apparently, this meeting at the cafe was part of their overall plan. It was only a block away. Vicky waited all day for this meeting. However, when the time came, she was very reluctant to show up in the direction of the cafe. Arriving at the appointed time, she stirred a little in front of the entrance, but still, gathering all her will in a fist, opened the door. She saw her at once. She was wearing the same dress she had worn the first time she had come to the cafe in Toronto to get to know her better. How much had happened. Ever since then, she'd wanted to have a déjà vu effect. What did she manage to do? They hadn't seen each other in 8 years. Come to think of it, it looked like Samantha had decided to mess around or push Victoria's guilt by taking another deep breath. Vicky walked toward the table where her former friend was sitting. She looked emaciated and thin. It looked like a whole year in a coma had taken a very bad toll on her health. Suddenly, Victoria realized that her former friend wouldn't be able to recognize her now with a different face. "Hi, Sammy, it's me, Vicky," she said as warmly as possible as she approached the table. "Hi," said Samantha dryly. There was no emotion in her voice. There was silence between the girls again, just as there had been the first time. I guess it wasn't just a suggestion to meet. Vicky broke the silence again. "Yeah, sorry. Just getting my thoughts together." "You look different," the ex-girlfriend remarked. "Yeah, plastic surgery works wonders. It's probably how you seduced my husband. Why would you do that?" "It's not like you, Samantha. Things have changed since you stole my children." "I didn't steal them." "How dare you say that to me? When you asked me to take care of them and not give them to your parents. That was clearly an emotional thing to say, and you should have realized that. I didn't ask you to steal my children and run away with them. I gave birth to them through pain, still in shock after my husband's death. What did you do? You decided that you could take advantage of the situation so that they could be yours now. But darling, I'm going to upset you. I'm taking them back. There's a trial in 6 days, and it's sure to give me my babies back. So if you want to say goodbye to your babies properly, you have those 6 days. Samantha, how can you be so cruel? Think of the kids. They don't even know I'm not their birth mother. To them, you'll be just a strange auntie and nothing more. You can take the children, but you can't have their love now. That's none of your business, Victoria. I've said everything I have to say. This conversation is over." The woman stood up abruptly from the table, threw the bill on the table, and rushed for the exit, leaving Victoria behind. For 1 week, the week spun. She had only a week left in her mind. to somehow solve the problems that had come upon her. When she got home, she saw her husband standing at the panned window drinking something from a tall glass. Vicky carefully approached him. "Isn't it a little early to be drinking?" The woman asked, pouring wine into her glass as well. "Under the circumstances, it is the right thing to do." The man said calmly, "Why didn't you tell me your real name? Even after we were married, I wanted to forget Vicky's past. I wanted to start a new life with you and the children. We have. Everything was great until that goddamn detective came in. I'm so tired of this nightmare." "I know, me too, Tony," said the girl, deliberately calling him by a name that wasn't her real name, because that's what she called him in their most intimate moments. It was a kind of supportive reminder of their love. The man walked over and hugged his wife. He didn't know what he should do, go back to his former spouse and take the children. However, according to the documents, he had nothing to do with them. After all, he was a different man now. Antonio Jorge, a different person. And their father died in a submarine 8 years ago, but he didn't want to leave his second wife. He was truly in love with her. He did not want to destroy this marriage and just had no idea how to get out of such a hopeless situation. It didn't take long for almost all the days he had marked to pass. Victoria never ventured to tell their children that she was not their birth mother. However, she and Alexander decided to tell them something that would explain why the court would be held on Sunday and why they would probably be taken away by some strange aunt. They made up a tale that she and Dad needed to leave immediately, and the kids might have to live with a foster mom. It happens. It's normal. They tried to indoctrinate their sons. At first, the boys rebelled, but after a while, they accepted the fact. Everyone in this house was now awaiting judgment, and everyone lived it in their own way. Victoria watched TV incessantly. Alexander drank and slept, and the children stopped doing their homework and played computer games all day long, feeling terrible stress. And finally, the day of the trial came. The trial was held in Toronto, as both Victoria and Alexander were still Canadian citizens. They were escorted to the trial by police officers who had arrived for that purpose. There was silence in the hall. The judge's stern voice interrupted the noise and conversation. "Based on all of the above circumstances, my colleagues and I have reached a decision. The court sentences Victoria Wilson to 15 years imprisonment under the articles kidnapping of a child, as well as obstruction of lawful actions of the authorities and forgery of documents. The children remain with their birth, father and biological mother Alexander and Samantha Brown." The room erupted in cheers and boos. Many were shocked by the judge's decision to separate the children, and the mother who raised them for 8 years. Was a crime in itself, thought many people who knew Victoria well previously. In the hall again heard the banging of the judge's gavel, and everyone could appeal against the court's decision can be filed in 2 months. Until then, the guilty will be taken into custody. Alexander looked for his beloved Victoria with his eyes. However, when he saw that she was twisted by 2 officers and led to the exit, he almost burst into tears. He only had time to see her devastation, sighting the sight of a man who had lost all hope on his shoulder. Someone's light hand lay on his shoulder. Turning around, he saw Samantha holding their children's hands. "It's time for us to go home, dear," the woman declared. The first month with his new family dragged tediously for Alexander. He and the children moved into Samantha's parents' house. It was far from the center of Toronto and looked more like a ruin. The house looked just awful. Stripped wallpaper, dampness, marks on the mirrors and no cleaning. Dirt on the scraped parquet, some where the boards had already rotted. The kids were assigned a Merca-sized common room for household items. The children never accepted their new mother. On the whole, she turned out to be a worthless wife and mother. The children were mostly looked after by their grandparents, who were very stiff and ironic in the household. "You dropped a cookie. Now you're obligated to eat it, shake off the dust, and you don't get a new one. For another month, you're cornered for every offense and sometimes deprived of food." Another day, Samantha's mom yelled at Michael, I pay so much money for you. How dare you study so disgustingly? You don't pay for me. Madam is providing for me. My father proudly replied the boy. Oh no, come here, trashy. Your father abandoned your own mother. Poor thing. Left alone. That thing named Victoria has totally spoiled you. I'm gonna drink the shit out of you. Continued to shout crazy grandmother, but already crying child. Alexander, seeing this scene, spoke to himself at the boy. How dare you yell at my son? Strictly asked the father. He is a careless, lazy, and arrogant boy, and Joseph is his exact copy. 8 years they've had it drummed into their heads. Now it's time to set them straight and make good Christians out of them. 2 lunatics with those words, Alexander turned and took his son to his room on the 2nd floor. Did you see what your mother did too? Asked Samantha's spouse, who was sitting by the TV. As glued on the sofa, beer bottles and cookie crumbs were lying around. The woman didn't work anywhere or do anything around the house. Those kids are getting a little frustrated. Alex, they need to be raised properly, but not with violence. That's the best way to beat the crap out of them. The woman repeated her mother's words while drinking another bottle of beer. The man moved closer to the sofa. He was tormented. From the pungent odor of cheap alcohol and his wife's missing clothes. Are you drunk, Sam? I got a right to be. And you settle your kids down and go to work. The man shook his head in hopelessness. As they left the living room, which looked more like a brothel, her husband turned and said, You're not the Samantha I used to love. Your parents have changed you so much over the years. Samantha, you can't go on like this. However, when he saw that the woman wasn't even listening to him, he walked away and swore to himself that he would get out of this nightmare and get the children out of here. Alexander tried to spend as much time as possible with the children so that they would not be harassed by this sadist. However, while he was away on business, they were treated by his father-in-law and mother-in-law, and Samantha herself, who also often practiced this way of upbringing. The man could not fully protect his children from this family, and he could not take them away from this nightmarish house either. After all, by court order they had to raise them together. And the social workers were checking on that every 2 weeks. And Samantha herself was not at all eager to leave her parents. More and more he wondered how Victoria was feeling. How was she? Was she okay? How was she handling the situation? He was not even allowed to visit her, as he was forbidden to do so. Alexander was simply dying of despair. The man loved Victoria more than life. Yes, he used to be head over heels in love with Samantha, but she had changed. She was no longer the sweet and cheerful girl he had met at some party in Toronto years ago. Everything had changed since then, and life was divided into before and after, so he decided to take action. He found a good lawyer in town who could help him with the case, and even though he had to pay most of his personal injury settlement, it was worth it. The lawyer said there was a chance. I saved you. Without me, without you, we would have lived just as happily, the man summarized, and left the bedroom, which reeked of dirty linen, alcohol, and cigarettes. It had been exactly 2 months since Alexander had last seen Victoria. He hoped to find her now in good health, cheerful and healthy. He dressed well and prepared himself for another hard day in his life. Samantha would be furious when she found out that Victoria's defense counsel was being sided with her husband, and he was ready for it, her judgmental eyes on him and weeping with anger. The eyes in the courtroom were full of people. Everyone was terribly interested. Where would this convoluted case end? There were 3 bangs of the gavel, and there was silence. Everyone in the courtroom, please be seated. Thank you. The judge scrutinized some documents on his desk, then looked around the room with a stern look. I asked the prosecution to come forward. A murmur went up. While in the center of the hall, certain people on the prosecution side came out. Along with the prosecutor, Samantha spoke. Standing up, she gave Alexander a caustic smirk. Suddenly, the courtroom doors fell away, and 3 officers walked inside, followed by a handcuffed woman. It was Victoria. Alexander's breath even caught. She looked exactly the same as she had when she'd been led away from here 2 months ago. Sure, she had lost a little weight and her hair was different, but her face was just as full of longing and hopelessness. She was led to a special place for the condemned, which was rewarded with 4 clear panes of glass. The defense side, please. The lawyer nodded to Alexander, and the latter went out following him. He did not look into the hall, because he already knew that there was a look of surprise on people's eyes, and Samantha was probably glaring at him. When he reached the podium, however, he still had to look up. And sure enough, the first thing he saw was the outraged face of Samantha, who clearly wanted to kill him right there. Unfortunately, he could not comfort his Victoria. After all, she was beyond his reach. But he was sure she was proud of him. That's exactly what Samantha Brown had reassured him. You are a victim in the abduction of your children. You claim they were stolen a month after they were born while you were in a coma. That is correct. Yes, Your Honor. The defense. What do you have to say to us? Alexander's attorney spoke first. Your Honor, it's simple enough. There was no abduction per se. The day Samantha gave birth to the twins, Victoria was her midwife. Before Mrs. Brown began to lose consciousness, she asked Mrs. Wilson for a favor. To quote from the witness, "Please take care of them. Don't give them to my parents." The judge didn't seem very convinced by these words. Can you offer any convincing evidence that that was the case? Yes, Your Honor. There are 3 people in this courtroom who were present that day at the clinic when Samantha Brown gave birth. They are our witnesses and can corroborate what I am saying. 3 people were called after that statement. All of them were women. Among them was Lily, who took over as chief medical obstetrician, and after Victoria's departure, Sarah, who had risen to the position of midwife, and another nurse. The judge interviewed each one, and they all testified the same thing. That's what happened. Samantha had indeed asked Victoria to take her children. Sam looked at Alexander with a judgmental look. At that moment, she realized that she was walking on thin ice because 3 witnesses was a serious line of defense. However, her attorney also had a strong argument that she hoped would outweigh the defense. Your Honor, Samantha's attorney took notice. Please take note of the fact that Samantha's physical condition did not allow her to make such serious decisions. As you know, after these words she went into a coma, which indicates that her mind was foggy. There was a commotion in the hall again. Everyone began to discuss the details of the story. Your Honor, Alexander began. The children grew up with Victoria as a single mother for 7 years. She was able to raise them into fine, well-mannered boys. They received a proper education, and they always had a favorable home environment, which is not the case with Samantha and her parents. The lawyer told his client to be clearer. I didn't want to use that as an argument. However, I'm going to have to. Samantha has suffered from alcohol addiction for a long time. I lived with the children at her parents' house with her for those 2 months, and that was long enough for me to realize that it was a completely inappropriate place for my children. An assistant came up to the judge and put some papers in front of him. You can see it from the photos I took personally, Alexander said. But that's not all. I have seen my children physically abused many times, their grandmother and grandfather. I had to protect them from physical abuse, and their birth mother, Samantha, is completely unable to raise them. I believe that children do not belong in such a family. Independent experts from the Juvenile Guardianship Commission were invited to the home, and they evaluated the situation and gave the report that is on your desk. Your Honor, counsel added. Samantha was quiet, groaning and swearing foully. She realized this was a complete failure. The court went into session, and until the verdict was reached, everyone in the room could rest for a while. Many people supported Alexander. Some came up and expressed their sympathy for him. Victoria smiled from behind the glass and thanked him with her eyes. He was proud of the work he had done. Finally, there was silence in the hall again. Silence. The judge came out. Everyone waited with trepidation for the decision of the peaceful gavel to strike again from the knocking 3 times. The court decided to recognize Michael and Joseph George, Antonio George, and Victoria George, with Victoria Georgia S. as the legal guardians of the minors. All charges previously filed are dismissed, the judge proclaimed, cutting through the noise in the room. He tapped the gavel again on Samantha Brown's biological mother. Permission to visit her children at a time to be determined separately after her treatment at the rehabilitation center. The trial is over. There will be no further appeal. The hall gave a standing ovation. Alexander had no idea how many people were supporting him. Victoria was uncuffed and released from the cage. She immediately ran up to her husband and smothered him in her arms. "I've missed you so much," Alex cried to the woman. "It's okay. We'll be fine now," he soothed his beloved. The taller children surrounded them. On her beloved mother, Victoria began to hug them, to kiss them. She hadn't seen her poor 2 months and didn't know if they would ever see her again. The woman did not let go of her children for a long time and led them by the hands all the way out of the courthouse. There they got into a cab and went to the hotel. The next day, the plane was already taking them away to their home of Istanbul, which had already become their home. It was there that Victoria's happy life began, where it would continue. Finally, the family was at peace again. Everything stabilized, and they all healed as before. After compulsory treatment, the court allowed herself to visit the children every month, any day by arrangement with their guardians. 2 months after she was discharged from the clinic, she wasn't seen at all. She seemed very angry about losing the case, but Victoria and Alexander did not want to see her, so they did not even try to call her. One beautiful summer day, however, a phone call came. Samantha said that she would come to the children in 2 days to spend time with them. She apologized for her behavior and assured that she holds no grudges. She just wanted to see the kids. Victoria, of course, was still hostile toward her former friend, but she had to put up with it. "Are you sure it's going to be all right?" Joseph asked at breakfast. "Of course, honey. We're doing this because you need to know your other mom. It wouldn't be fair if she couldn't communicate with you." That's how Vicky reassured the boy. "Yeah, I guess so. But she's bad and cruel." "No, she won't be mean to you. I'll be there for you all the time. Let's try to have a normal conversation with her for once." The doorbell rang. The boys were scared. Their father was at work, and it was he who represented in their eyes the greatest defense against this terrible woman. A voice came from the hallway. "The boys are in the living room." A woman with long white hair walked into the kitchen. It was Samantha. She didn't look the same when she was at her parents' house, no longer drunk and unkempt. Now she had smoothly combed hair, good makeup, and decent clothes. She looked pretty decent. That image inspired confidence, and "We're having breakfast here," Victoria explained, sitting down at the table and gesturing for Samantha to sit down as well. "Do you like pancakes?" "Of course. We used to have them a lot with you." When the woman in the class fell silent, she realized that she shouldn't have remembered those times when they were mysterious friends. "Yeah, I remember," broke Vicky's awkward silence, "which means you can eat a couple of them." "Because I've cooked too many," Samantha happily agreed. They had a strained discussion about the weather, the kids' favorite breakfasts, their progress in school. The conversations were decent enough, and Victoria was beginning to calm down. The idea of putting up with Samantha in her house once a month didn't seem like such a terrible phone call anymore. "I'm going to step away for a moment," Victoria muttered with a smile. The boys were a little concerned about their mother leaving, but Samantha kept them busy asking questions, so they were a little distracted. "I am called to work, so I will unfortunately leave you for today." Vike turned to the boys. "Samantha, can you keep an eye on them? Today they have a chance to play with them if you want. It's very bonding. And then tonight we'll watch a movie together. Just please not a scary movie. Otherwise they won't be able to sleep without a student for a week." "Mom." An embarrassed Michael shouted indignantly. "I'll shut up. You guys are the bravest. I love you. I'll be back tonight. Please don't do anything here without me. Daddy will be home early anyway." and Victoria left the house. "What should we call you, Auntie, or the other mom?" Joseph asked. Samantha was a little angry at such an inappropriate question, but did not show it. "I think it would be easier for everyone if you'll just call me Sam." The boys laughed with relief. "Good, Sam," Michael said, looking at his brother and his reaction. He grinned, too. "So, boys, I can see you're having fun already, but why don't we continue the fun and go to the amusement park? Who's in favor of amusement parks? Didn't Mom say to stay home?" Michael asked, surprised. "Your mom said I should just keep an eye on you. That doesn't mean we can't go have fun. So pack up, and we're leaving in half an hour." "Do you have a car?" "I thought you came by airplane." "Yes, my dear, but we can hire a car. So let's pack up and go on a real roller coaster." The children scurried merrily to their rooms to get ready for the park, while Samantha stayed in the kitchen drinking tea. Her plan had worked flawlessly so far, and she was pleased with her foresight and fortunate circumstances. CCU. I made myself known at home. Mother, entering the apartment, it was surprisingly quiet and dark. Maybe the children had already gone to bed. It was already 11 o'clock in the evening, so Samantha had probably put them to bed. Vicky decided. Maybe their friendship wasn't completely lost yet, and they could at least partially regain their old and good relationship. She peeked into her bedroom. Alexander wasn't there yet, but he'd warned her that he might stay out late tonight, so Vicky wasn't particularly worried. Tony or Alex. Sometimes she was lost as to what to call him now. He was in charge of security at a nightclub and often came back late. She poured herself some tea with rose petals and sat down in the kitchen. Leafing through social media feeds, she thought it was strange that Samantha had left without waiting for her. Maybe she'd fallen asleep, putting one of the boys to bed. Victoria decided to check the room. What she saw, or rather didn't see, shocked her. The beds were empty, with abandoned things lying everywhere in disarray. She ran to Michael's room, where she saw the same picture. Vicky began to nervously call herself. The number was unavailable. She called again. This attempt ended with the same result. Then Victoria rushed to the bedroom at the speed of light. Her hunch was confirmed. Missing were all the children's papers, birth certificates, insurance, everything. The girl's hands began to tremble with shaking hands. She dialed her husband's number. He didn't answer either. What the hell was going on? Where did everyone disappear to? They decided to run away with the children together, left her alone. However, she found Alexander's passport. He wouldn't have left it behind if he wanted to run away. So he did stay at work. Maybe something happened. While she was gone, a burglar broke into their house, took them hostage. Victoria's mind was filled with all sorts of thoughts. In the back of her mind, however, she'd long since figured it out. This mysterious disappearance. Samantha had kidnapped her children. She tried once again to call Alexander to no avail. There remained the only way out: the police. The girl dialed the number and waited for the operator to answer. She was told that the patrol would arrive in a few minutes. However, these minutes lasted like an eternity. Victoria pressed her fingernails into the pads of her fingers. She always did this when she was wildly stressed in some places. She even developed small scars. The doorbell rang. The woman opened it instantly and invited the police in. They were two officers of large build, which inspired confidence and was even reassuring in some way. "So, ma'am, repeat again. What were the boys wearing? When did you leave for work?" asked the officer again. "I told you they were in their pajamas, and when I went into their rooms, I saw clothes scattered all over the floor. They'd obviously changed clothes." "Officer," hysterically declared the mother. The man offered the lady a seat and a drink of water, which she did. "A little calmed down," she said to my scene. But then into the apartment came the very one who had just been talked about. Alexander looked at her with round, horrified eyes. He quickly discerned people in police uniforms searching around the apartment and taking pictures of everything. "What's going on here again?" "Vic, shocked?" asked the man. A dark-skinned man of full build who was holding a pen and a piece of paper looked at him. "Sir, come this way. We will quickly explain the situation to you. There is no time to waste in the precious time it will take to find your children, my children." "Victoria, where are Michael and Joseph?" Alexander was already shouting. Victoria couldn't take the pressure and burst into tears right in front of everyone. "Sir, you waste time yelling. You are worried about your wife and children." The man realized his mistake and approached the officer with the same terror in his eyes. "Your children stayed with their birth mother all day, and your spouse went to work entrusting her with the boys. I know that. She told me everything. She was urgently called to work in a calmer tone," said Alexander. "We suspect Samantha Brown of kidnapping your children. Can you give us any information about her whereabouts? Maybe she called you." "No, I haven't received any calls. My phone died at work and I couldn't get through." Alexander walked over to his wife and sat down next to her. Now the officer was interviewing the two of them. "Do your children have any phones or means of communication?" Victoria wondered. Because of the stress, she did not immediately understand the policeman's question. And then it hit her. She even got excited. "Yes, they have cell phones. We bought them so they could call us from school in case of an emergency." Victoria immediately realized her mistake. Why didn't she think of that in the first place? Call Michael or Joseph. They would have answered for sure. They're smart boys. They'd think of something, wouldn't they? "Did you call them?" The officer asked in a stern tone. "No, I didn't." But the officer didn't let her finish. "Great, give me their numbers." The woman dictated her children's phone numbers. And then she stopped talking again. She looked at Alexander, trying to find support in his eyes. Her husband locked his arms around her shoulders, and they waited together. "What does the officer say?" "Boney," said the officer into the radio to the right of the number I just dropped you. "Get the location." The policeman took one look at you alarmed couple. "Don't worry, we'll find them. We found people after they've been reported missing only days later. It's gonna be okay." His walkie-talkie forbidding voice spoke out. "I found them, but they're in completely different places. It's weird." The kids were together. When the couple heard this information, they panicked. Had Samantha killed them? But that couldn't have happened. She wouldn't kill her own children. The officer was also in a stupor, but into his walkie-talkie he ordered, "Send a car to each of these addresses. Have them clear every handful of land there." "Copy that." The voice on the phone went dead. "Do you have any idea where they might have gone?" "Toronto," Alexander said out of the blue. "Samantha flew to us from Toronto. She probably rented a car to drive there. They wouldn't let them out at the airport, but she'll be driving there. God knows how long." The officer objected. Samantha would hardly be intimidated by that. An hour later, they were on the highway. The detective stated that his men had found 2 cell phones, but they hadn't found anything else. Perhaps Samantha had done it to throw them off the trail. However, after a thorough investigation, they learned that there had been 2 carjackings in the area of the exit highway. Perhaps the woman was changing cars to get away from the pursuit. Alexander and Victoria were traveling in a car with police officers. They found one of the cars that had been abandoned in a field. It contained the children's belongings. Vicky found Michael's favorite sweater there. "Alex, we'll definitely find them," sobbed the girl, clutching in her hands the only native thing they found during the search. "Vicky, it's going to be okay. We'll catch up with them. We'll make it. The main thing is not to despair," replied her husband. Although he himself doubted the effectiveness of this chase, they drove to another scene of the accident. There they were met by a man who reported the theft of the car. "She cuts me off, pulls a gun on me, and throws me out of the car. I didn't even have time to object before I was on the street without my car and without my dog," the victim emotionally recounted. "You had a dog in your car?" The officer was surprised, writing down all the statements. "Yes, they stole my little girl." The victim gave them the license plate number of his car and also showed them the direction the crazy woman could have gone. "What did the kids look like?" Victoria braked the man. "They were intact. They didn't have any bruises. No, startled by this reaction, the man replied. They looked tired. However, they didn't try to run anywhere or ask for help. Samantha seemed to be beckoning to their brains with her mind. She could spin any nonsense she wanted, such as that they were going to visit her, and there would be a mom waiting for them. Mom or just scared them a lot, and the kids would just obey her. She could lie about anything. The cunning of this woman was obvious. "I've got them," one of the uniformed guys told the officer. "They're taking the Atatürk highway. We can catch up with them. Get in the car," ordered the officer to the tired couple. They were exceeding the already breakneck speed with every new second. And Victoria thought they would eventually crash. She and Alex were in the car along with 2 policemen. The first was driving. The second was negotiating on the radio. The other cars were traveling behind them. Suddenly, around the corner of the highway, they saw a car with the same license plate. It was them, Samantha and their kids. "I got them. We're in pursuit. You're spreading out on the highway, blocking traffic so she doesn't turn anywhere. Do it," shouted the officer to the officers on the radio. "We've almost caught up with them," the officer stated. To the trembling parents of Samantha Brown, "Stop the vehicle immediately," shouted he into a megaphone. "Are you breaking the law? I repeat, stop the vehicle or we will open fire." Samantha's response almost killed Victoria. Literally, a bullet flew over her shoulder. After recovering from the initial shock, she saw the wounded officer in front, who was sitting next to the driver. The bullet had scratched his arm. She really does have a real gun. Victoria became even more worried about the children. The car wiggled from side to side, trying to catch up with the perpetrator. And then something happened that Victoria didn't expect at all. A bullet slammed into the driver's arm, piercing the windshield. Failing to control himself, he crashed into a fence as if it took Victoria an eternity to hear the whistling and laughter in her ears. Opening her eyes, she saw blood. A lot of blood. The officer who had been sitting next to the driver had been thrown through the windshield straight to the ground. The driver himself was typing into the airbag and was unconscious. But when she saw Alexander, she felt nauseous and pained, but he was alive. She realized it by the movement of his chest, which rose and fell. He was simply unconscious. He probably had multiple fractures, though, because he took the hardest hit, realizing that there was no way she could help him on her own. The woman got out of the car. 2 SWAT cars and an ambulance were already approaching them. Victoria showed them where the people were and ran to the other car. They hadn't gotten far yet. "Give me the car. I'll catch up with them." She screamed hysterically. "You can't drive. Calm down." Victoria came right up to the sergeant and grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. Her eyes glittered with anger. "My children are in mortal danger right now, and I don't care about your rules or laws. Give me your goddamn car, or I swear I'll force you into it and you'll drive me." "Okay," agreed the policeman, frightened by her energy. "I like your plan very much. Just calm down. Please, get in the car. I'll drive." Victoria fast got into the car. A moment later, a young sergeant got behind the wheel. It looked like he was just starting to work for the police, and maybe she would deprive the poor guy of his job and his life at the same time. But all she cared about now was her children and their well-being. "They're speeding up," the woman shouted. "I can't. We're gonna crash this whole thing into pure suicide. Take the wheel." "We're going to switch places now," Victoria declared. "You're not entitled. I'm entitled to everything when it comes to my children. Either you switch places with me right now, or your family gets word that their kid died in a car accident." Of course, Victoria's lying. However, the boy seemed to be impressed by these threats. He held the steering wheel while Victoria shifted into the driver's seat. At one point, she sat on his lap. The guy grimaced in embarrassment because Victoria was wearing a short skirt. "Look at the road, not there," yelled the furious mother. Finally, when Victoria finally switched the kid and places, she pressed hard on the gas. There were only a few meters between them and the car they were chasing. Samantha tried to fire again, but it only slowed down the speed of the car Victoria was chasing and missed. Victoria was almost able to catch up with Samantha's car, and that's when the worst happened. As they hit the bridge at breakneck speed, did something happen inside Samantha's car, and the car slammed full speed into an iron pole, causing a fire? No. There was Victoria's heartbreaking scream. "Oh God, no!" Pulling up to a safe distance so that the imminent explosion wouldn't spread to their car, Victoria jumped out and ran to the burning car. With difficulty, she opened the back door of the car. She felt a wild pain as she opened the door, which was just as red-hot as lava. Vicky cried out in pain, yet still crawled into this burning hell. She prayed to God that her children would survive and her prayers would be answered. She pulled first Michael and then Joseph out of the car. Both were unconscious, but alive. And that was the most important thing. Get them to emergency services and get them the help they needed. Ordered that an ambulance be called here as well. Ordered Vicky to run up to the boys. The man nodded, grabbed the children in his arms, and put them in his car. Already in a moment, the car was rushing down the highway in the opposite direction. Now it was up to Victoria to find out what had happened to Samantha. She ran to the front driver's door and, remembering a past mistake, wrapped her hand in her shirt. Only then did she pull the door open. What she saw horrified her more than anything else she'd seen that day. Half of her face was churned into her chest, with the debris of something iron jabbed into it and pierced through her. But the worst part was that she was still conscious. Samantha barely turned her head. All that could be heard was a faint wheeze singing from her shattered lips. "Blood. Shut up. Help is coming. Just be patient a little longer," Victoria shouted, as angry as she was at the kidnappers. This was her friend, though they had betrayed her, yet a friend. And Vicky couldn't just stand by and watch Samantha die. "I'm sorry, Vicky, I'm sorry," sang Sam out of her last strength. Victoria squatted down and put a hand on her shoulder, as if to support Samantha. "My sweet Samantha, why did you and I have to make such a mess?" Vicky's tear rolled down her cheek. "I can't survive," mumbled Samantha in their arch into the blood. "Vicky's God. He will take me to heaven. But I want you to know, I never wished you harm. I want you to forgive me." The woman began to choke, blood gushing from her mouth. Victoria whispered, "I forgive you. Sam, of course I forgive you, and I still love you. Go in peace, my darling. Our children." Vicky didn't get a chance to finish. Her friend passed away in front of her. Victoria cried out in unbearable heartache. She had lost someone close to her who had given her true happiness. Be that as it may, it was thanks to Samantha that Victoria found a husband and children, found a real family. Happiness is nothing but close people who stay with you, no matter what you do. And Victoria was insanely grateful to the team that life had brought her to. She spent the rest of her life restoring Samantha's good name in the eyes of her children and their mutual children. She seemed to have succeeded. Her husband was devoted to her until his death. They lived a long and happy life and gave the world another living being, another child, a girl, their not-so-good little Sammy, who was named after the unfortunate mothers of their eldest sons who had died tragically.